how do I start developing a database class application? So to start with database application, you have to just understand little bit a concept called DB provider class or helper DB provider and DB helper class. So basically DB provider class is uh, or is a class, and this is not it is more like a design pattern or something like a nice practice and good practice to have. So what generally I recommend people that whenever you are having a Android database application development, try to separate the whole logic system into three parts, and that three parts come something like this. Uh, so I call it this one as a provider class. So we have to design two classes. One is called provider, other is called helper class. Now, what is the use of a provider and helper class? Basically, provider and helper classes are not much but a way to uh, provide uh, decoupling of few activities. So what helper class does is that it has a responsibility to create database, will create these classes, and then it has also the responsibility to create tables in database. It has the responsibility also to upgrade the database if there is any problem. It has also the responsibility to open and close connection to the database. Connection to the database. So it has also the responsibility to open and close the connection to the database. Now these are the responsibilities. So what we are going to do is that we are going to create a helper class to do that. Now what is the responsibility of provider class? Provider class responsibility is to make a request. First is make a request to get connection to database, to a database. Now what does this mean? So what provider class will do is that he will tell the helper class, hey, can I get a connection to some database called ABC? And here database can be given any name, and they are nothing but just a small database file. So what provider will say that get me a connection to a database named XYZ. Now it is the responsibility of the helper class to check if that database exists or not. If it exists, then open the database, get a connection and pass it to the provider class. If it does not exist, then create that database and then open the database connection and then pass the connection to the provider class. So basically the responsibility of opening the connection, closing the connection all lies with the helper class. Provider class has just to make a request to get a connection to a database by passing some name. The second thing what we have to do is that he will execute, not execute, sorry, make request to run the queries using the connection object. So what it does is that first it makes a request to get connection object, and then make a request to run the queries using the connection object. What is your typical activity class will do? By the way, these provider and helper classes are just a basic normal Java classes. There is nothing so special about them, so don't worry about that. Okay, so these are the activity classes. Activity classes, their responsibility is that send SQL statements to provider class in generic way. So what is the responsibility of activity class? Send SQL statement. Now, what is the benefit of doing this activity class, provider class and helper class? The benefit is that tomorrow if you want to have 10 more activity classes, in your application is going to have 5 more screen, 10 more screen or 20 more screens. You do not want to put the logic of database creation, database connection, sending the SQL query, all of that into that new screen again. You can just create a screen and send just the whatever SQL statement logic you want to pass in a generic way to the provider class, and it will take care rest of the activity. That is one benefit. Second benefit, tomorrow sometime after a while if you want to change the database itself. Now if you want to change the database and you have 200 different activity and a screen, you don't need to change everywhere. You can just go inside the helper class and rename the database and all your application will work fine. So this is called a very well encapsulated and decoupled design of a database application. Okay, so this is very well, this approach is used, call it as encapsulated and decoupled design for database applications. Now, number of times on the internet you will find that there are a lot of database applications on Android which are not with 2-3 classes. The whole logic they have put it in the single class. Will that work? Well, it will work, but over the time it becomes a very difficult challenge how to do that and take care of it. So what I would generally suggest is that please follow the model called helper, provider and activity. Now let us see this in terms of the one of the concept slides which I have created. So what it says is that my activity class makes a request to DB provider class, and DB provider class makes connection to DB helper class, and its responsibility is very simple. First to create the database, open the database, close the database and upgrade the database. And one of the most important things which you might want to know, that creating this helper class is, although it is not must, it is strongly recommended by Android, and for that purpose itself Android has given you a very specific API called Sqlite Open Helper. This is an Android class. This is an Android API. Okay, and inside that there are methods called on create, on upgrade, on open, on close. These are callback methods which get triggered whenever the database is created or upgraded. So in the beginning Android will create a blank database, and then you have to put a logic of creating the tables and everything inside on create method. If you want to put some logic of asking the user ID or password or something, you can put it inside on open. If you want to do any logic, then you can put it inside on close. If you don't want to put any logic that what happens at the time when the database is opened or closed, you can leave it just as it is, because moreover SQLite database is in process, so you don't care. The DB provider class what the benefit is that all the DB operations method is specific to our activity are defined here, like insert, delete, modify, search, but they are written in a very generic way. What it does is that if you write it in a very generic way, then any activity, you can have multiple activity B, activity C, activity D, and all of them can connect to this and just send the whatever the kind of a data they need. If it is select, then just send them the number of what are the columns or the table name and the where clause. If it is search, then again the what you want to search, and DB provider class, they will do the real query firing. Query firing here happens here itself. So this is basically how do you decouple the logic of your complete database application. And now what is the next thing what we'll do is that we'll try to write some code and see that how it works. Okay, so let us go ahead and see some applications on how to do this.